For now, it is time for Bridgette and Kelsey.
Hey, everybody. Hey, we've got a little bit of a story to tell you, listeners. And most of the listeners, Kelsey and I used to be in Studio A. I forget. I had to kind of quit my show. I had a lot of things going on. I had Carrying Stones and Digging Holes radio show, which was on Wednesdays and Saturdays for 2 years, maybe a little bit over 2 years. And I'll let Kelsey kind of tell her part. So I just was exhausted and I needed some time off, and I just really need to focus in on some heavy duty education programs because I really needed some upgrades in my credentials. I hadn't done anything with my osteopathic stuff for like 25 years. So I'm in a 6-month program now, catching up on some stuff. And then doing some anthroposophy medicine work that I've really wanted to dive into. Plus, I had all my herbal medicine stuff that comes during the summer. And so, I had to quit the show so that I could kind of get some sleep, kind of about face and change directions rapidly because a lot of the choices that I was making was coming full speed at me. And so then I had to plunge on into that and just kind of had to work on resources in order to, pull it all together. So now, the now phase, number one, Kelsey and I know Kelsey. Kelsey and I have known each other for about 5 years. We've worked on some things together here in the Reno area. We both live in Reno, so I know Kelsey from Reno. And I got Kelsey's show, Cultivating Consciousness, on Wednesday in Studio A. And then just kind of, I don't have the time to do a whole show by myself. I was doing like 30 hours a week between both days, getting guests. So I needed, a co-host so that, if I can't make it, she can show up. If she can't make it, I can show up. And also to have somebody to talk to, so we don't have to have as many guests, but we can choose to have guests too. Yeah. So I want to also, I know the intro, the music is pretty crazy, but I just want to say a huge shout out to Willow.
Yeah, thanks, Willow.
For doing the voiceover. And also I just want to thank Ahmad for, I just want you to know that everything that you taught me, I remember. So I did the whole background. It has like, background noises, and it has like 30 different noises and sounds in it, kind of, presenting consciousness, kind of in a sound factor. So anyway, pretty excited about doing the show. We're in a different studio, like I'm saying. So we're in Studio B and we're in the evening. So it's going to be a little bit of a change and getting used to things. But yeah, so thanks everybody for getting it all together. Also, you can find our thumbnail at the 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturday in Studio B schedule on Freedom Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. Scroll down the Studio B, see the schedule. If you click on that thumbnail, we have a back page. So you can, glean some information about Kelsey and I off that back page. And then there's areas where if you want to send us an email or whatever else, you can. But we don't do hate mail, so you will be ejected, rejected. So anyway, so I'll let Kelsey talk because I'm a little bit nervous, so I'm chatty. So,
are you nervous?
I am a little bit nervous, surprisingly. I was
kind of surprising. I'm like kind of surprisingly calm, but I feel like just so much of what you said is like resonates with what's going on in my life too. Like I've just been tired, and so needing to catch up with sleep has been so important. And it's been hard because my radio show that I was doing Wednesday mornings, I love that space, and just being able to just express myself within that space is so valuable, I think. But if I'm trying to get caught up with education and get like school stuff back in order on top of like personal life stuff and dealing with custody and things, like I'm listening to to my body more, and I like the body keeps coming up, and I'm just super, and this guy too, because we got this little co-host in every other week, but so yeah, no, it's going to be interesting, and it's going to be neat, and I think because I got a year in with Revolution Radio. And I'm learning so much. And between you, Bridgette, and Ahmad, and Willow, and just I think just my whole audience that I had for Wednesday mornings, and just the support and all the backup, it's almost overwhelming. And there's so much to talk about, and there's so much to learn, and to get to like have some direct feedback at this point in time, I think is really important too, because what an interesting time to get to speak on, don't you think?
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too is that my other show, I loved it, and I loved a lot of the guests that I got, a lot of the people I've known, just these amazing, amazing people that, I've had in my life. But I wanted to also, about face in a different direction, because I really feel like a lot of people kind of are waking up to what's going on. They're figuring it out. And that was never really, I never really wanted to be the wake up person, even though I was involved with whistleblowing for 30 years, mostly for me in medicine. But I always wanted to be, the person that was set up for, once they came through the tunnel and they woke up and they're dealing with a lot of anger and everything else, I wanted to have not like a spiritual base, but an energy base. And I feel like now this show can actually be that, right? Because I've got you. And initially this is, when I set up Carrying Stones and Digging Holes, I had Janie on, and she was going to be my co-host, and she's Cherokee, and she has a lot of really interesting stuff and doing heavy permaculture, and so, but she like totally just lost it after about 2 months. I think radio too, there's a level of authenticity that you have to have personally, and you end up bumping up against stuff. And if you're not authentic, you don't do well with radio, or maybe you don't get a response from, the audience or people, telling you, oh yeah, you're so great or whatever, or, and you get hate mail instead. But, she totally like flipped out and fired herself. And so this is kind of like what I had initially wanted to do like 3 years ago. I mean, I have done lots of different TV and radio, for the last 11, almost 12 years. But I really wanted to have something where, we're presenting like ideas about consciousness, and it's not so like airy fairy, it's not totally out there in the ether. Because I'm not a really kumbaya kind of person. I don't do kumbaya.
I think the science behind the consciousness is really important, and then getting to speak to it from a very like grounded in real space is super important. And I think I hit a threshold, because I don't know, I'm having a hard time letting go of my other radio show, because I like that space so much. But it's like you're saying that, like, just having to turn and make a completely different direction, and just being called and pulled into a different direction for something else. So I don't know, the whole like just let it go Kelsey thing keeps coming to mind, because I just feel like lessons. And so I don't know, at some point or another it'd be nice to open up back into that space, but there's so much that I don't know, and I feel like I got to a point where I could regurgitate a lot of the information and like synthesize and kind of process out loud. And I really like the radio space. But you're right, like you have to be in like an authentic, centered, grounded space, especially when it's live, in order to do it. And then I hit a point too where I would really like to connect with more guests, and then being on the West Coast, having a radio show at 3 a.m., it's made it a little challenging to get people to show up. And so it's put me in situations where I haven't necessarily felt compromised, but I feel like I've had to improvise a lot more than what I want. So I'm looking forward to getting to do this show with you and being more like being more organized and being more focused and getting really clear on how to help support people through that awakening or through that consciousness and through that understanding. Because it's quite the ride, but the mind, body, spirit portion of it, I think, is important. I think I got the mind part of it pretty well integrated, and the spiritual part of it is integrating itself, but in working back into the body, that part, that's the challenge. So,
well, I mean, I think that's what happens though, right? If you're out in the public, you kind of have to, once you've worked through or, taken in enough, like, spiritual food or information, then you have to like apply it, and you hit that. That's where the physical comes in, like alchemy. You have, this is the way that I understand it from kind of a Steiner perspective, right? Because I'm, deeply in, been involved with Steiner stuff, a lot of the agriculture and stuff for years. But now I'm in a course called Applied Anthroposophy, which is really interesting course. It's tough though. It's so tough. And it's every Thursday that I have it like 10 months. 10 months. So it doesn't end until like the end of May. And they keep beefing it up. So now we just started an every day, if you can make it 5 days a week, 15-minute practice at my time, 9 a.m. On top of it. And then it has all of this really kind of heavy information, and it's really about how we're interacting with ourselves and how we interact with the world. And we even have these coaches in there that do biography, and they call it, in the anthroposophy world, they call it biography, and it's considered what they call social art. So I'm not a big art person, like I'm a huge healing art person, but I'm not a big art person. And so in the past, I've avoided kind of arty kind of things. And so now I'm doing biography as a social art, and like digging deep down into my own personal biography and then how that plays out. Like we just got done finishing the, month and a half section on freedom. And so we had all these different speakers come in, every Thursday evening and talked on perspectives of freedom. And then, we do all this work on what that freedom may be in our own lives. And then, having to do practice every day of the week now for that particular thing. So it's been pretty intense spiritually, because I'm doing that. And then I've got, a whole year of courses with anthroposophy, medical. So I'm really, diving into that. I just really dig a lot of, that information, because Steiner was a quantum medical person. He was teaching quantum medicine, and it's sad that he was murdered in 1924, and it takes people this long to actually start to be able to like start to grasp what this guy left behind, and some of the other people from his era, like Victor Schallenberg. I mean, there's just so many like of these amazing doctorated, well-educated, mystical type people. But yeah, so I'm just in a whole other space these days, of, not more in the conspiracy or the other stuff or the law stuff, backed way off from a lot of this stuff. And I'm just focused in on, the energetic, spiritual, in like every aspect of my life, because that's kind of what my focus is with education. And it's interesting how, I know you kind of hit up against this too, because you started working on your PH or at your doctorate.
Yeah.
And you kind of like, that was kind of what hit you also coming in spring, so we were both kind of like, okay, if I go back to school, I might as well leave now. And then it's really rocky, and I had to drop some stuff because it was too much. But so you kind of had the similar thing, huh? You want to talk about that?
Well, yeah, because chasing education or just kind of like taking like a really giant leap of like, this is where I'm going to invest my time and my knowledge basis. Because I started last fall, and I had to take a leave of absence last spring, and then I just had to apply for another year of leave of absence. So I've got a year to like really get myself in a space where I feel like prepared and dedicated to take this on, because it's going to be 2 years of coursework and then up to 3 years of research and dissertation. And I've already started the research and dissertation aspect of it, but so minimally, but it's going to be so time consuming. But I realized in going through that process what my walls were and where like my limitations really were, and what it is that I'm really going to need, and where my headspace is going to need to be at before I really dive in and venture into that. And so I feel like where I might be a mirror for you, or we might be kind of a mirror for each other, is the arts and the creative space. That's my whole life and my whole world and everything that I know. And coming to the relationship of the quantum dynamics of how creativity and creation plays into this connection, and how it opens up the channels, right? Or how you get into channeling and connecting into different dimensions and reality, and trying to apply that to the real world has been really challenging, because what's been new for me is the cultivating of the earth, and trying to garden and really get my roots solid, to understand what my foundation is. And you can learn so much from vegetables and like just trying to grow vegetables, and the dirt and the science and the components that go into it. And so yeah, it's definitely, I'm grateful to have this space where you and I can have these sort of dialogues, because I feel like in these growth periods, in these like great transformations in like the realm of the healing arts, it can be really intense, especially coming into it from a very new perspective. And I think I take for granted a lot of how young I am. So I feel like I hold myself to these really unrealistic standards, and then when I don't meet them, then I just like tear myself apart, and then I have a hard time knowing where to place myself into things. And so I feel like, especially within this last year and getting to talk it out loud and process it, there's been a lot of shedding of different layers, and like trying to get to the core root of how, like who I am, and trying to understand how to apply it. Because I think there's definitely things that people need, but when we go through these like rapid growth cycles, or I think when we integrate things from all these different levels of understanding, we often take for granted what it is that we know. And so it's nice to have your support in being able to voice it out loud, and to find that confidence and to dive deep into that. Because I think when it comes to what it is that I'm researching, it's so bizarre. Or like my PhD is in transformative studies, whereas my master's is in transformative leadership. And there's these like very broad concepts, but they're integral psychology degrees basically. So I can include the arts. And I didn't chase art degrees because an MFA or a Master's of Fine Arts is a terminal degree, and you can't really go anywhere with it. And so I feel like I like the comforts of academia a lot. And so I've been able to find holes, or these little compartments within academia, where they're, like you're talking about, there are these people who are these very mystical people who've been able to apply the science to it. And then the more I dive into like the academic side of it, the more I see like how many holes there are in it. And although like I think academics are important, if they're not integrated, then they don't necessarily do each other any service in that sort of a way. But it's neat to be in a place or in a time of research like where we get to dive into consciousness, because consciousness is new, right? So there's a lot of room to be creative within that understanding. And so getting into the healing art side of things, or like the shamanic practices, or seeing how people can make these like radical shifts in healing and self-healing through that creative process is so fascinating to me.
Well, and I think it's not new. It's just it's just been hidden from us for a long period of time, and that now it's starting to, resurge, and people are starting to, look into it. I had a really intense, anyway, part of this 4-part lecture I had for anthroposophy medicine, and it was a drop kicker. It almost dropped me so hard with like some of the information that like I almost completely melted, and I had to like really keep myself from completely melting because everything was going to fall apart in my life. I could just see it happening. But there are, this information, that's old. I mean, because, Steiner, a lot of people, I will say this, I'm not a cultist. I do not like cult stuff at all. So the cool thing about Steiner is that Steiner has all these different branches of information and people that he was involved with. And I came through the biodynamic door, the agriculture, and did all the programs and interned on farms and then built my own stuff and consulted and, and now I'm moving into more of the medical, the nutritional, plant medicine, homeopathic remedies and, things like that. And so I have to get like a level of understanding about how Steiner perceived like the body and, how things worked. And then there's this trouble with, it was in, I think he was Austrian maybe, but I forget exactly. Anyway, and then he had his work, and then it had to be translated into English. So a lot of the stuff was translated, like, around, between 25 and 1950. So it has a lot of this old language in English, which makes it even kind of more difficult to kind of sometimes understand some of these, like ideas. And this class, you'll love it. It's kind of like the class I had this morning was called, and it was taught by a beautiful, well-doctored, beautiful man who studies Steiner, who's aged and is like one of the top embryologists, like kind of in the world. And he was from Holland, so he's actually teaching us this class. And so I had the first session today. It's an hour and a half, and this is the title: How Our Organs Influence Psychological Well-Being. So we're studying like the whole embryonic. I mean, it's funny because I'm glad that I've had a lot of medical stuff in my background, because I think if I hadn't done a lot of the work that I've already done, I would just be so far in over my head. But we were talking about, so it was kind of an interesting class because this teacher was just amazing. But he was talking about, I'm going to see where my notes are. But so he was saying that, there's this like, phrase that we use in kind of the mainstream, this whole cymatics, right? Which is like the sound or vibration, and then people can visualize it by putting, say for example, a black piece of material over a speaker, putting salt over it, flat surface, and then, you can turn on different frequencies and sounds, and you can watch the particles move into different symbol looking type,
sacred
features.
geometry. Yeah. Oh, they're beautiful. Yeah. Patterns are phenomenal.
So he goes back to, he talks about how that movement, which, we don't really think a lot about in the development of the human being, causes the vibration, and it's like cymatics, right? But it's the movement. He said because the movement, once say for example, and he also showed this was pretty mind-blowing. He showed some stuff going back from the cell, and he showed pictures and stuff because they have a whole different understanding. other than America. America doesn't have this understanding. They're like 800 years behind on medicine and scientific information. That's why it's also so great to study with people from outside of the U.S. And he was showing that their data is showing that when the egg from the woman, is waiting, for the sperm, that it showed like the sperm, the way that it kind of before the egg decides to open up to a particular sperm, right? It shows like how the sperm actually move the egg around, right? And they said, and sometimes they can get it spinning, like in a direction, in one direction.
That's weird.
Yeah. And so he was talking about how that the movement creates the form because, right, it's the movement of all these little intricate things and how it's like a cymatic sound vibrational frequency of the movement of these different biological processes. And so then he shows how, the cell morphs, it starts to, I can't think of the word, but it starts to separate and divide, and it makes, a whole bunch more cells as it develops. But he talks about when the big form and the development of the form happens, it's when the heartbeat starts. And you think about that, you have all these different little movements, intricate movements, and these little cymatic, patterns that are going on in the development of the being, through the cells and the sperm and all of this stuff. And that how the big moment, right, when the big power comes out, the sound and the frequency, here's this boom, the heartbeat starts, right, which also starts to really ignite the form. And so it was like this really crazy class, because sometimes I don't know what I'm going to sign up for. And a lot of the things that I want to learn, like, and how it relates to us in medicine, is coming through a lot of this anthroposophical medical courses, because we're talking about things like this. We're talking about movement instead of actually having like a sound or a vibration that you could hear. So then you think about, like, how does that relate to now? Like, if I want to change something in my life, then I'm going to need the movement to change the form. Or I'm going to need the movement to change my form. So you think about being overweight, or, maybe the heart's not working so great and the lungs aren't working so great, and a lot of these things, and a lot of it has to do with that you don't have movement. Your movement has stalled, and so it can't actually create your form, right? It can't help you to hold your form or keep your form. So it was kind of a really interesting talk, kind of about the aspects. And then also when we go from an animal consciousness, like Steiner talks about, into the human consciousness, about that time frame. And it's just like, was just such a kind of a mind-blowing class on just how, this stuff is relating, how the movement changes, how it creates the form. And so you think about, like, all these spiritual texts are always talking about the sound or the vibration or, the word, and then, the word was spoken and then it became, whatever it was going to become. And now I understand more and more and more, about why, not so much that you want to dance, but you would want to have some kind of movement, right? If you wanted to move into a spiritual approach, you could, like, say, for example, if I go to ceremony, in the native way, and there's always going to be a type of dance. And when you go and you do that kind of dance, around the circle, the altar, the fire, that you're moving into, like the sacred, right? You're moving into that sacredness. So you have that movement that takes you and helps to develop that form. Maybe it's part of you that needs to tap into higher realms And maybe the movement precedes it. Maybe the movement assists it. Maybe the movement creates the vibration or the activation in order to assist that and make it happen.
I'm glad you brought up the bodies, like the embody stuff too. I got linked, a friend of mine sent me a link to, what is it, the embodiment conference. And I think today is the last day of it or something like that. But they had it up for free. And I think you still might be able to access it at the embodimentconference.org. There's like free videos and things where you can pay them a bunch of money and you can have like lifetime subscriptions to it. But it was neat because they were talking about some of the things that you're talking about as well, and like just getting into the body and going with flow. And it was neat to see so many different professionals from all around the world, from like so many different like backgrounds. So they had like stuff on like coaching and things on creativity and then things on wellness and all these different applications, but all different practices on getting into the body and getting the body to flow. And I've always been fascinated by the idea, like when you move the body, like the emotions release, or some of these more Eastern traditional concepts of like what you're talking about as how certain organs hold certain emotions and things, or certain parts of the body hold certain emotions. And when you begin to work the body through that, then you're processing those emotions at the same time. And we leave that out of like the informative part of the transformation process. Or like I think when I first started doing Kundalini classes, I think over 10 years ago, it was at a time in my life where I had started some pretty intense trauma recovery, and Kundalini just opened up and unleashed so much energetically in me that I was not prepared for. And it became really overwhelming, so I had to step back from the practice for a while. And there's parts of it that I like pull into my body, but diving full into the practice, it can be really intense. And I think that's kind of where that cultist idea comes into mind. Or then you start getting into these different yogis and gurus and things that start to direct behavior. And I don't know, people are strange. What the body is capable of doing is strange. And if we don't understand it from that like full-on holistic perspective, I think we can get very lost and then channeled into these different things, or prescribed things that aren't like in resonance with who we are and who our bodies are. But the dance part is fun because that's where we get to bring in the music. And then if you're aware of the influence of the cymatics, or of how like the solfeggios or the binaural beats, and you can, I think, consciously tune into the sounds and direct them into those parts of the body. You can see recovery processes, or you can just begin to experience the world in completely new and transformative ways. But it's freeing in a way, but it's one of those things where like once you know it, you can't go back.
Yeah, no, I'm reading this book too right now. I go to the thrift store, and then they usually have all kinds of cool books, and get them for like, $1.99 over there at Savers. But I picked up this one book called Yoga and the Quest for the True Self. It's actually a really good book. It was written like 30 years ago, I think in 89, a guy named Stephen Cope. And he was, kind of like a top shelf psychologist at kind of, I think, pretty prestigious university. And he also had a practice, and he gave it all up, and he moved to a yoga place, kind of had like a midlife crisis and moved to the yoga place, and then was only supposed to be there for a little while, and then ended up staying for a long time. And he talks a lot about a lot of the different speakers that come there, how he feels about things, what he undergoes during doing, physical yoga, and then, also a lot of the meditation work, and then, volunteering and working as a community. And a lot of that stuff kind of comes out, and he talks a lot about, a lot of the Eastern philosophies, little, really amazing little tidbits of stuff. So it's a book, if you can find it used, that it's a pretty good book. He talks about a lot of this, kind of more Eastern, I guess, esoteric kind of stuff. But it's a really good book, so I've been reading that for personal reasons. But I was, the other thing too is that I studied Kundalini. I studied with some women at like kind of an ashram type setting in San Diego on Coronado Island. And I lived on the floor, kind of had my little floor mat and all that, and was involved with some people who were doing Sikh stuff, or Sikh. That's kind of the name for it, but I hate using that word, so I call it more of the Sikh. And they also had some people that were also doing Mount Sinai Toltec shaman, or Mount Sinai shamanism healing work. And then they also all did Kundalini, and they all came from the Yogi Bhajan tradition. So some of these people, studied with Yogi Bhajan when they were like, 18 years old on his ranch. And there was a lot of stuff going on, listening to them about all the crazy stuff that was going on, during that time frame. But ended up doing this, practice. But some of these people, you do these practices, they're tough. They're really tough on Western people. And I think it's because we don't have, when I think about a lot of this Eastern stuff and I didn't learn, I had teachers that were trying to teach me from the Eastern perspective on, from the foundation or the basics of Eastern traditions on. They didn't realize that I didn't even have a foothold in a base of Eastern tradition because I didn't grow up with those spiritual systems, right? Or those basic dietary systems or the basic medicine systems, that I was like, I had needed a teacher to, start off kind of in the American point. One of the things I saw a lot of doing these ashrams and working with a lot of these really heavy spiritual people, especially doing the Kundalini yoga, that number one, a lot of them who were white really didn't do a lot of their spiritual work over the 35 years or 40 years in their teaching. Number two, they had damaged themselves in the process. So there's always like, that other polarity of too much. And the practices were tough. You couldn't have any meat or any kind of meat products or anything like that in the house. They, were very offensed, with any of that. So there's like this, certain type of diet, which, when you come into that, you're not prepared for it. I mean, you really need like a full coming in from an American point of view into like Eastern food like that. And these perspectives, you really need like a thorough detox before you come in. Before you even start. But a lot of the people that were involved for a long time had like kidney failure, or were dealing with, really heavy kidney issues. And it always kind of shocked me because I thought, okay, well, here are these people who've been like, devoted to this, mind, body, spirit, physical body, energy, whatever else, but are sick. Like what the heck is wrong? And I realized it's like, Americans take things and we like overdo it. We can't just do like a sun salutation. Nope. We got to turn it into like, power yoga, like, and do like harshness and, like destroy ourselves. I mean, I think a lot of people don't know that like regular type of yoga, the very physically challenged part of yoga, was actually for the teenage boys in India. So it was like kind of a pre-military like type practice, right? So it was actually for boys. Like it was never really meant for women to do. And then, we up it and we make it like harder. But a lot of these people involved in this Kundalini, because, number one, we're sleeping on floors, which is like super hard, because you're living like, bare minimum. And you're tired because you're doing these practices, you're starving to death because you're not really getting, any of the foods you're used to. And you have to get up. The alarm goes off at like, 3:30. You take a cold shower. not a whole shower. You just rinse off with the ice cold water. You get
Always with the
dressed.
cold water. Oh.
Sometimes the ashrams, things are cold too. I mean, they're cooler because, they're running on like donations and funds. And so they don't always have a lot of money for things like heat. So, and then you get up and then you do like 2 hours of meditation. Mind you, no coffee, no nothing, right? You just cold shower and then sit into meditation. And then 2 hours usually of some type of Kundalini practice. And it, like at least an hour of the physical, and then, maybe, part of the energy practices like after. And so you have like 4 hours of practice every day. So you're like literally worn out and you're starving. Well, think about, those are for you to get your life back on track, right? That's not like, these are not things that you want to spend your life doing every day because of the harshness on your body. Number one, you just went into REM, usually like around 3 a.m. That's when your body heals. It's when if you have enough enzymes in your body, when your gallbladder and liver is going to dump. Most of the time, our gallbladders and livers don't dump because we don't eat enough enzymes in our diet. But if our body's going to do anything, it's going to be during that REM period. And here you are like, shocked out of that REM period, out of your important sleeping healing period. And then, you do these heavy practices, and then you have these very, limited, very, hardcore vegan diets. And, after
through Kundalini is really intense too, because then you're purging all the toxins through the breathing and then moving all kinds of stuff around through that.
Yeah, the spine and the lymphatic, because it's really stringent on the cerebral fluid and the lymphatic system. So, but yeah, so, I saw a lot of people who, did this for long periods of time that, had kidney failure and kidney disease, and, it just really shocked me. And it made me realize, like, that's why, we go on, this is why we want to go on retreat for, a few days or a few weeks or maybe a month at the most. But then we want to come back to our life and pick out the little things that we liked and adopt them in our life, but not have like this really controlled, restrained lifestyle. So sometimes I think, with the spiritual, the movement, the health, the healing, people can kind of go overboard, like cleanses. I mean, people can cleanse all of the microbes out of their bodies. I mean, they're all like paranoid about worms or whatever else. And yeah, should you do a worm purge every once in a while? Yeah, but you shouldn't like go off the deep end, because then you'll kill all of the microbes in your blood. And our bodies are composters. So we need these microbes in our body to actually take the bad stuff out, chew it up, and make it into something else, a productive product in the body, like a full circle. But if we're constantly cleansing, then we clean out the stuff that we need to stay in the body to stay alive. And so you don't have microbes, you die, because you have nothing to deal with the bad stuff, the bad stuff that's coming through, the bad stuff that is produced in the cells or outside of the cells, all these different things that need to be cleaned up. But Americans, we just like go, sometimes so far off the deep end. And I see that a lot in the spirituality. I see it a lot in the health. Like I have friends that want to lose weight, and they'll go on like, a 6-month juice fast till they lost like 80 pounds. And then, then they just gain all the way back because they go back to eating the diet that they had before. It's like, it'd just be really nice if there was like some kind of balance, you know what I mean? Maybe just incorporate those vegetables into your daily diet, Anyway,
And slowly, like slowly work it in and slowly adapt to it. Well, I think a lot of like how we think about our food too before we're going to eat it is really important, because if we look at our food and we think there's no nutritional value in this, it's not going to sustain it, like then your body's not going to absorb the nutrients in it as well as it could, as if you're to look at, say, your Twinkie and be like, my body is going to absorb something positive from this. So I don't know. I think the relationship between our food and how we eat it, and just knowing what your body type is and your blood type and how all that is so important. There's not really a one size fits all. You really got to know how to like listen into your body. Or like the thing with salt too, of where I thought about this morning, or somebody had told me this at one point, where if like, you know, if you don't have enough salt in your body, if you're eating something that's salty and it doesn't really taste very salty for you, it's a good way to know that your body needs more salt. Whereas if you eat something salty and it tastes too salty, then your body probably has too much salt in it. But I would imagine like you'd have to be pretty attuned to yourself, or pretty awake to like what your body needs are, and kind of beyond the addictions and things like that, because we can very quickly talk ourselves out of what we think is good or what we think is bad when we get into like the verbal dynamics and the internal conflicts and all this conditioning, and then it's just all full circle, and then it's just systemic, and it's
Well, I think about salt, for example. So like, what does that process work on? For example, are you talking about Himalayan salt? Are you talking table iodized salt? Are you talking about MSG salt? That's usually laced with a lot of stuff, and which you end up having addiction to and you actually crave. So, like even with just like determining like the statement that you made about salt, like, if it tastes too salty, you may not need it, or if it's under salty, but it's like, what kind of salt are we talking about? Because obviously, like, something like MSG, which is a salt, which is in pretty much everything, which also causes, childhood developmental disabilities, permanent ones. People don't realize, and kids are eating a lot of MSG preservative, but it has a very salty flavor. So I think also determining, it's probably, that statement probably goes with something like Himalayan salt, where you're getting like, all the nutrients, and you're getting all the trace minerals and all these different things. Because the other two salts, like table salt with iodine in it, is not that great. I mean, really the only thing kind of it has in it is iodine. Just kind of has lack of all the other stuff, and definitely MSG. But, that's the thing in our society these days. We have all these different levels of things that have to be looked at. And health and all aspects of health is a full-time position. If you want to be healthy.
Sugar too is one of those, like, kind of like salt, where so like there's a lot. So I apologize, I don't know quite the correct terminologies, but our body processes a lot of foods into sugars, right? But then we have different levels of sugar that's good for you as well, and sweeteners and non-sweeteners and diet sweeteners, and just the amount of some stuff just blows me away. It's not just something sweet that you crave, or you're going to eat a peach or a nectarine, or are you going to eat a bunch of candy? Are you going to eat a bunch of carbohydrates? Because it all eventually turns into sugar in your body, but there's the good sugars and the bad sugars as well.
Yeah, and that's a fine line.
Yeah.
Healthy sugar versus unhealthy sugar is a fine line, because there's so many like detrimental sugars, like all the fake ones that they've made. I mean, it's one thing I always tell people, like in nutrition and herbal medicine, that it's one thing, in our day and age, we have food and nutrition, sugars and all these different things that are so many steps away from nature and away from the plant. And so I always tell people, like, if you have to choose, the closer that you can get to that plant, right, that product that plant produced is going to be the healthiest for you. So obviously, if people wanted to have like an alternative sugar, you could grow a stevia plant, like right on your patio or your kitchen sink, and the leaf is sugary, and you could take like a little mortar and pestle and crunch it up, and then stir it into whatever you're going to drink, right? Because the moment that they take it from the plant form, there has to be a chemical process, right, to turn it into like a powder. So, there's like obviously probably a dehydration process, all these different processes that are used. And usually in order to speed things up to get to the shelf product, you've got a lot of steps away from that plant. So for me, like, looking at alternative sugars, like if I could use a stevia leaf, that's one thing, but I probably wouldn't use like a stevia powder at all. I would probably avoid it. I would probably go for something more like molasses, because molasses as a sugar is as close to the plant as possible. And sometimes the Hispanic store here, they used to sell these little bell-shaped sugars in these forms. And basically what it was sugar cane taken and pressed, and then all the juice and everything else, and some of the pulp probably, they would put into these little molds, and then it dries, right? It dries naturally, and then you can break off the little pieces, for sugar. But a lot of people don't realize, like, when molasses is taken out of the sugar process, and it's stripped away, then you have white refined sugar, but it doesn't have anything viable in it. So that means when you eat it, your body has to actually pull out nutrient from your bones and organs in order to process it. Same with distilled water. That's why you should always add minerals to distilled water, because in order for it to process through, it can actually attach itself on, because it needs these different molecules and atoms and all of these different things to get itself metabolized and through the process and out. So a lot of the white stuff, sugar, flour, sugar, so you always want to like go more towards a brown sugar, one that like is browner, or like the molasses, or even things like a grade A maple syrup. You got to be careful as the grades go down too. Like, for example, most of the butter you buy at the grocery store is like a double A. Like, that means it's not even really butter anymore, right? You always want to, like, also when you're looking at foods, you always want to go with the highest grade that you could get. You always want the grade A plus, because then what's in it is exactly what's supposed to be in, instead of all this other stuff that's added to it. But sugar definitely is one of those things that it's really important for people to look into. And it was a lifelong work of Weston Price, who was a dentist who studied a lot of his work. And he would take photos and go to locations and look at tribal people's teeth and how straight they were and white and how strong they were. And he started making the correlation to, the influence of, things like processed flour that don't have any nutrient viability in them because it's so refined, sugar that's so refined that it's actually has no nutritional value in it, and it's in the negative, so it actually has to pull it out of your body in order for it to process through. So he started to show the crooked teeth. So the more crooked the teeth, the more chromosomal issues that particular person had. There was like some defects in the chromosomes. So they showed like the sugar and the flour over time periods actually in the culture, especially white culture, you could see that the teeth went from like straight, where it was like really good solid, DNA and chromosomes and biological material, to every generation the decay. And it's interesting because Americans are big. Dentistry is huge at hiding that. Me being able to look at somebody's teeth and take a look at, each tooth represents, a part of your body. So you can literally like look at the teeth and see which ones are extremely crooked, and you can correlate it to, that area of the body, those organs, and that they probably didn't develop right with all of the genetic material, because it also is a heretical thing. Like, it couldn't be recovered. So once the offspring happened from the person who is being, genetically altered eating the refined sugar and flour, when they had their offspring, the offspring was heretical. So that it couldn't go back. You couldn't fix it. So then that person, if they eat flour and sugar, they're going to cause more genetic mutations, and their offspring are going to have more and more genetic mutations. And this is like, something that was being discussed scientific. It was like Weston Price spent years documenting this stuff and doing research. And we hide this, in American society, making it really difficult. I mean, as a doctor, if people had their crooked teeth, the doctor could look in the mouth and go, oh yeah, okay, so you're 10. Oh, hold on, break. We'll be back. Sorry, break.
Okay.
This is kind of like the conversations we have. So now we can just talk to each other every week and record them.
Which I think is really cool. And we get to share them too, because I think we get to have some really cool conversations. And I get to learn a lot from you. And it's cool, because I think we get to have conversations and talk about things that people don't always talk about, don't necessarily talk about. So it's fun.
Yeah, and I think I'm learning, part of Rudolf Steiner, Waldorf, all this stuff like art, arts, that kind of stuff, arty-farty stuff, is, part of the design. So it's actually helping me to kind of understand your work and actually physical art, I think, a little bit more, and kind of understanding, just how it can be beneficial, you know what I mean, and all of the different things that you can get from it, health, mental health.
Well, so much of my art is biographical, and I like that you pointed out how you're working on the biography part of it. And what I like about art is anytime it's such a personal expression of your emotional self. It's that like most private primal thing. And what happens is when you make something, whether it's a book or a painting or a drawing or a sculpture, you learn a lot about yourself, because you don't really know what it's going to look like until you make it, and then you surprise yourself. Like, you're like, wow, I didn't know that that's what it would look like, because your hand doesn't always match your brain. But the biography part of it is so cool, and especially in growing up in an era of social media, from like the AIM, or like the instant messengers, into the various platforms now, knowing, or like taking social media from like an artistic lens, knowing that anything you put down, it's going to be logged, and it's going to describe you as a person and how you perceive the world. And then the alchemy that happens because you have that emotional bit of you, or you have something within you that you get out, and you get to put it out on paper. You get to express it in some form or another. And when you get it out of you and you turn it into something tangible, and you can see it or feel it or work with it outside of the self, then you can change it and you can alter it, or you can rewrite your story, or you can be very picky and choosy about how you communicate that story. So with the symbols and the colors and the words and the sounds, all these little subtle details, they may not seem like a very big deal, but when you apply it to the creative process, to something that you're making, they can have profound impacts, not only on yourself, but on other people, because we're all one, and it goes into the collective conscious, right? And it feeds into this overall memory bank. So you get to take this feeling or this aspect of your life, pull it outside of you, alchemize it, turn it into something helpful, healing, hopefully of service, hopefully not something destructive, or I don't know, even get kind of funny with the word destructive, because in order to create something new, you have to destroy something, right? So we get into that weird, like, the judgment language. So we try to stray from judgment, but this is where where I kind of get stuck of like what intention is, right? Or like where consciousness starts to come into play. And so if you get to create a biography of the self, if you get to put yourself out there, like it's a very vulnerable place to be. It can be kind of scary, and a lot of people stray away from it. Or in society, we reserve it for outsiders, or there's a lot of stigma put onto it or put into the creative process, and it's a lot to work through. But yeah, the biography about it, because you can convey your story in so many different ways, and so when you find a way, you connect to it, you might as well like move that energy, right? Then you got to grow from it, and then you got to take accountability, and you got to be responsible for that growth, and can't necessarily take it back.
Yeah, no, well, and the thing that we're doing, it's not quite like writing a book or a biography. It's kind of like, your spiritual preparation for kind of something like that, later. But it's intense because we have like 130 people in the course. And then when we do the biography, this social art biography work, they'll, throw some questions at us, and then we get a few minutes to, answer them for ourselves. And then we're thrown into little groups, in our little Zoom meetings. So you might have like 3 to 5 people in your little group. And then each person, gets, a few minutes to answer their answer for like each question. So you have somebody who prompts the questions and then answer. And that is like, you're dealing with, there are people from all over the world and from all different kinds of ages and backgrounds, and you get torpedoed, like you were saying. It's like you're so like raw and vulnerable, and you weren't prepared for it. It wasn't like they said, okay, so we're going to do this biography work on this Thursday so that you could avoid it, because maybe that's something you don't want to explore in yourself, so you get smashed. So this is October 15th. I'll just throw out a sample for you. Okay. So we looked at this video on TEDtalk.com. And in case anybody wants to go look at it, it's called The Danger of the Single Story. And it's kind of about, being categorized into a single story of, who you are, kind of a thing. So it's a really awesome little talk. But and then the exploratory part is, think of a person or group for who you intentionally had a narrow-minded picture, where you later got a richer perspective. So you have to think about, if you've been narrow-minded and, you were judgmental, or made a story for somebody, categorized them, wrote them off, or, whatever you're going to do. And then once you figured that out, then you had to put an animal, what would that animal look like from that experience? And then the second question was, think of a person in your life who has never been able to see you for yourself. How does it feel to be in that relationship with that person? And then also assign an animal for that experience. Then part 3 is think of a person in your life who sees you for who you really are. How does this feel to be in a relationship with this person? And then you have to assign an animal to that. And so then you have to explain to people. And then the last one was, tell me what strengths the 4 animals offer you. So that was like the last part. And, these social art things, they just kind of, I think, kind of come at you from, both sides of your your brain, your left hemisphere and your right hemisphere, and it gets you kind of all screwed up. And which kind of, I think, is like a can opener to opening you up to, kind of a deeper perspective of yourself.
You get to dive into the subconscious with it, because when you allow like the animals to come through, then you get to delve into the archetypes. And when you get to dive into the archetypes and kind of detach it from your own like projected meanings, like, because if you think about it, like 95% of our awareness is, or like 95% of us is unconscious or is subconscious and below conscious. And we're only aware of such a small percentage of what's going on at any point in time. So that creative process, when you allow yourself to open up to what's just below the surface, you can have some pretty powerful and overwhelming revelations come through, and then to have to do that in group.
I know they're like, so what's your animal for the prompt question? I'm like, I still don't know. The thing is, like, I didn't really see myself as a narrow-minded person. Like I'm not really a narrow-minded person. So I picked a bee because, I'm into smelling all the flowers, and socializing, getting to know people, and however that works. And so it was hard to, put that together. And especially in like a social art or a social like biography, about yourself, because how could you really, like, in the long run, write a biography really about your life if you really haven't done a lot of the work? Because here you're going to write something that's unauthentic, right? It doesn't really have that vibrational rhythm movement, that cymatic power, engaged into whatever it is. Doesn't have that power force in it when it comes out, and then you think about manifesting your reality, and then, this power, this energy that comes from being authentic, and the movement and the rhythm, and creating the form. And maybe that does play a lot into whether your book is going to be really successful or it's not, or your piece of artwork is going to be really successful or not, or your private practice is going to be really successful or not. Is maybe it does have something to do with this vibration part of the form that I think, being authentic really kind of provokes and irritates and gets jiggy.
I think good art is supposed to, and attributing like success to that is, I think, where we can hold ourselves up. Because what's the function behind it? Or like, are you trying to make money from it? Are you trying to awaken? Are you trying to inspire somebody? Are you trying to heal yourself? Like, who's it for? What's the point? What's the intention behind it? And I think as far as my own process goes, every piece is like has its own approach, or has its own vibe. It's got its own feel. It's got its own purpose. And one of my pieces, it's a book, and it's an autobiography written from the perspective of an alter ego. and it's written from like the first like quarter of my life. But it's a hodgepodge, and it's a collage of like different bits and pieces and understandings, and like when put together and trying to like synthesized as a whole, like it doesn't read as a traditional biography. So there's like all this other like subtle meaning and all these other like bits and pieces to it. And I feel like for me it worked. It helped me to put whatever like the sensations are, all the unnamed feelings, all that like weird stuff, and just put it onto something tangible, synthesize it, alchemize it, call it a thing, and then be able to put it up on the shelf. And it's interesting because I think I wrote it put it together maybe about 7 years ago or so, 7-8 years ago. And so in reading it and going back to it, or even like in journaling and like being a chronic journaler, because I fill at least 2 books, 1 to 2, sometimes 3 books a year, just in like writing down. And every time I go back and read it, it has a different feeling and it has a different meaning, and I can see where I've grown. And so I can be authentic with it, but I've also noticed in those times where it's very authentic, there's a lot of things that I just want to keep to myself or keep for me. And so knowing who to share what with, or being able to discern who's going to be able to, I guess, being able to handle or understand that level of energetic intensity can be kind of challenging. But then again, that's where we get into like the effectiveness of the art piece, because it should in some sort of way move you. It should have some sort of vibrational feel to it. I think we can understand like music a lot better. Like cymatics makes a lot more sense, I think. I like cymatics because it helps to bridge that gap between like the auditory world and the visual world. So you can see what you hear, or you can begin to make the connection that like words especially, or like light, color, all those like very like minute details can have very profound impacts on the body. So I don't know, I'm really intrigued by how art can have like physical alterations, or how art can create physical alterations in one sort of a way. Or a lot of my earlier research is in neurological implications of aesthetics. So when you look at something, how, or even when you perceive something, whether it be sound or take something in through any of the senses, like how does that translate in terms of like the mapping in the brain? How does the brain react to it? Because you can light up different areas, you can trigger different areas on the physical level, not biological level, before people even can become aware of it. So you can have like that subliminal influence, and then you can impact people on a subconscious level. And I think there's a way where if it's done right, or if it's done with certain materials or something like that, we can get people to have these very profound healing aspects. Or I don't know, like I'm all about getting to see how we can translate that creative process into consciousness, so we can have like instantaneous changes within the physical body, or even within the psyche. But it's harder to see it. You can't see the psyche, right? It's very subjective. So I think that's why I'm very drawn to like the physical world, or like by the visual arts. Yeah.
So what's like one of the most, I'm gonna throw a brick at you. No, I'm just kidding. Deer in the headlight.
We're brainstorming. I love doing brainstorms.
So I never really got to ask you about when you were doing pediatric art, and like what kind of kids were you working with? What kind of issues maybe they had, and then also maybe what is one of the most profound physical art healing moments that you've witnessed?
I've worked with kids K through 12, mostly at risk in various different settings. In the hospital setting, I got to work with kids in pediatric care. So like some kids were in there for very short term, whether it be a minor surgery. Some kids that I got to work with, I got to see on a regular basis because they were in there for treatments. I've gotten to work with kids in like physical trauma, in various levels of health. And I think I guess there's 2 different components to that, because just getting to sit with a kid and get to make art while they're just sitting there in the hospital and trying to heal, for one, in and of itself. And even there's a component where musicians came in and do music with kids at the bedside too, and that's, or even with adults, you see it in different components. But it always comes down to funding in these kind of settings, and in grants and working for nonprofits outside of the business. But anyway, from my own perspective, and getting to integrate the more quantum metaphysical dynamics and the conscious aspects, and coming in not only as an artist but also coming in as a psychologist and neuropsychological researcher, I got to have these moments where I could experiment with different, like, color therapies, or getting kids to be more aware of how the creative process can translate into healing themselves. So there's like subtle, like, aha moments where I get to connect with somebody in that, and there's always like the feel good of getting somebody out of like the pain mode and getting distracted. But I think the most profound thing that I witnessed within the setting, there's this girl who had come in she was young, but she wasn't that young. You know, she was in the double digits, not quite a teen, and like never had been in the hospital before. And she had to go in for, I think, like an appendectomy or something like that. And so the surgery it was pretty major. But mom and dad were also going through like some marital problems, or they were having fighting things. And so as a behavioral psychologist with a background in behavior, I'm watching all these different dynamics of how people are interacting. And so I can see mom and dad are at conflict. And so the little girl's also trying to get attention from mom, and mom's distracted and dad is distracted from these sort of things. And sorry, I got distracted with my own kiddo there for a second.
Yeah, and in case anybody, just so you know, Axe is in the background, so
he's
making all the noise. So we allow him, because he has to have something to do while Kelsey's on the radio.
he enjoys it too, and on occasion he's joined me for radio shows, so that's been fun. But I think he likes being present with it. But anyway, within this space, I can see this girl. She's just getting really upset, and she's the dramatic type where she's just loud and crying. And so when I walked into the space, all the nurses, all the staff are like, "Oh my God, this girl won't stop screaming and crying," and all the other patients are just like, "Oh my goodness," and this girl's just freaking out. She's just, there's so much going on, and she doesn't know, and she's just trying to like feel good. And I'm like, great, this is going to be an awesome moment. I can, just jump in. We'll do art for a little bit. I can get her calm. We'll just go from there. Let me work with her. But it was really difficult within that setting to get people to like just let me do art with her, because the nurses were like, "Oh, we just gotta get this girl out of here. Like, we can't handle this anymore. Like, we just got to do whatever we can just to, like, whatever." So, before I could even get all my stuff set up, I think, or before we could even really get into, like, painting, like, nurses came in and prompted her to go to the bathroom, or they had prompted her to want to do this, and the mom's trying to do this, and she's just distracted. So I'm trying to have conversations with the nurses at the same time, and I'm trying to explain to the nurses what are going on. I'm like, please just let me do art with her, because she's getting upset. And then I somehow talked them into getting mom out and like going to get a coffee. And then, but still, it's a hospital setting, and everybody's on their own schedule, and there's people showing up as they should on schedule to try to check to do things, and just interfering with this like just getting the opportunity to be creative. And I remember there's this young doctor, this young, beautiful lady, first day in pediatrics, like fresh out of school. You can tell she's fresh out of med school and hadn't slept in a really long time. And just, she wants to do a good job. And she comes in and she sees this the situation and like assesses it and sees it as trauma, and I see it as it's a behavioral situation. You know, the girl's in pain, but like she needs a distraction, right? And so the first thing the doctor says is, "Oh, the girl's upset. You know, you like sedate her, like give her something." And like, you don't need to sedate her. Like, if you go in there and you try to get her to do something, watch, she's gonna have a reaction and she's gonna act out because she doesn't know what else to do. She's 11. She's never been in this place before. She's freaking out, and you know, like, you guys are asking too much of her. And sure enough, they're watching this, and I don't know how we got into like this long conversation, but I just had this, because like when I finally got to sit and do art with her and I got her calm and like we could just hang out and whatever, like, and things got a little more smoothly, like having these conversations with nurses and doctors of like about behavioral practices and just like getting to connect to the creative side of things, like they just don't understand it. It's not integrated into the curriculum in many of these schools. And I think that's what has inspired me to pursue finding ways to integrate the healing arts and creativity into med school curriculum, and getting med students more in tune with like what mindfulness is and what behaviorism is and how creativity and therapeutic practices can speed up a lot of this recovery time. And
I mean, but you think about like if they're just gonna, you know, we have this war on drugs, right? And what did the first thing that they want to do? They want to medicate her. They want to, you know, dope her up. So what is she going to lean towards? I mean, really, medicine is being the gateway drug to let's just check out. And what's going to be the free thing that she's going to be able to buy that's going to be like a sedative? Alcohol. So, you know, they keep sedating her because they don't like her behavior, but then she's not dealing with any of the muscle memory, you know, all the stuff that's going wrong in her body, and then the surgery on top of that. And then how it is affecting her mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. And, you know, the situation, like you said, with her parents, if you just drug her, then she's not going to be able to work through it. She's working through it by being hysterical.
Right.
You know, I had this friend of mine, and she was hysterical. And she ended up being a really young mom when she was 16. And, you know, luckily her mom and her dad were good people. So, you know, they helped her to raise her first child. But she said that, you know, nobody really explained to her what was going to happen. And yeah, she went to Lamaze, you know, she did all this stuff that she's supposed to do and blah, 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 blah. But she didn't really like get what was getting ready to happen, you know, so everything was like fine and dandy. It didn't really like connect. And she said, you know, then she was at home, her water broke, and then her mom was like, okay, we got to get to the hospital because you're going to have the baby. And she said there was just something about that moment, you know, that she just couldn't cope with. And she just went into this really massive panic disorder and panic attack. And, you know, her family had to try to restrain her in the car to get her to